So I'm just going to go ahead and hope you can hear me. And if you don't, I'll try again. So what we're talking about tonight, our topic is, I survived divorce and separation, but I'm lonely. And this is a real struggle. I'm Georgia Shaffer. I'm a licensed psychologist. I'm a licensed psychologist in Pennsylvania. I'm a professional certified coach with the International Coach Federation. But as I begin tonight, I just want to clarify at the beginning, we're talking about loneliness, not, now I have an alarm going off. Don't you just love all the distractions? So what's the difference between loneliness and aloneness? When we're talking about aloneness, we're talking about when we choose, when we want to be by ourselves, when we want solitude, to reflect, to pray, to renew our and replenish. And so aloneness tends to impact our well-being in a positive way. Loneliness, which is the focus of our Facebook Live tonight, is when we feel disconnected, isolated, have a sense of you don't belong. Maybe you're feeling sad, or you're worried, or you've been hurt or wounded. And so we tend to isolate ourselves in those kinds of situations, which is not healthy for us. So loneliness tends to negatively impact our well-being. And so since we're focused tonight on talking about loneliness for the separated and divorced, I want to acknowledge right now the impact of that when you're separated and divorced has on your relationships. It can be really devastating. So if you're feeling like there's something wrong with you now that you're separated or divorced, no, you're not alone. And alone. And here's the reason why loneliness can be a real battle for those of us, and I say us because I'm divorced, that are, or maybe you're separated. First of all, when a relationship ends, what happens? Some of your friends distance themselves or disappear. Maybe your church family, you find people withdrawing from you. I know more than one Christian woman who was asked to leave her church once she was divorced. Or maybe financially, you have to move to a different place, a different home, a different neighborhood. So then you lose those connections of your neighbors. Maybe you were a member of a country club and you can no longer afford that. So you lose the connections of that lifestyle. Or this happens a lot in separation and divorce. The family of your spouse, your ex, feels they need to choose. And many times, obviously, they're going to choose their relation. And so you lose all those connections and interactions. So the list goes on and on, but I want to affirm, I want to validate. If you are separated or I should say, or divorced, loneliness is a struggle. It can be tough, but we're going to talk about, you don't have to stay there. There are some things you can do to minimize this emotional state. But I am going to say up front that there are going to be times you can't take the pain away. There is no, quote, painkiller for the loneliness. So there are times when we have to just grit through it to recognize that that's true. And as Christians, we always have Christ. he's clear. He never leaves us or forsakes us. But as I'm going to mention in a minute, we don't always feel his presence. We don't always feel that relationship. So here's what we're going to talk about. First, we want to identify and replace any distorted beliefs that you're still hanging on to about loneliness. So we want to make sure that we're holding on to the truth about loneliness. Then we're also going to talk about recognizing different things we can do, different suggestions of how you can minimize those feelings of loneliness. And then finally, you want to commit and invest in the life-giving people, the life-giving relationships and activities. So let's get started. Let's start with identifying what are some distortions or beliefs you still have around the idea of loneliness. Here's the biggest one that I hear over and over again. And that is, well, if I had someone special in my life, if I was married, I would not have these feelings of loneliness. That is simply not true. Probably the biggest fantasy. We buy into the idea of romance. Marriage is going to eliminate those feelings of not belonging. Just today, I was talking to one of my married friends. She has 2 sons, and obviously she is married, her husband. And she said, sometimes I feel disconnected. They're sort of doing their thing. And I do have a sense of loneliness. And I can remember a couple years ago, a friend of mine, she had been divorced for a number of years, and she got married. And I asked her at some point, I said, okay, you were divorced, now you're married. What's your experience with loneliness now? And at first she stopped, and I could tell she was thinking, she was going to say, I don't get lonely, but then she realized she did. And she said, you know what the difference is? When I was divorced and felt lonely, I would reach out to a friend. I would call someone or text or connect. But she said, now that I'm married, I honestly expect my spouse to take away those feelings. And then she realized that was the wrong mindset, that even though she was married, she still needed her girlfriends and the life-giving connections, that no one person was going to meet all her needs for relationship. And so if you're believing that, if you're believing, well, if I just had someone in my life, if I was just married, and I want to tell you, you'll probably have people in your life say, oh, you know what you need to do? Just get out there and start dating, get on a dating site. That is not going to be the answer to learning how to deal with loneliness in a healthy way. Because I just said, even if you have a significant person in your life, that's not going to take away those feelings. The other idea is, and we got to remember in that feeling of connection, we do have Christ. He needs to be our first love, but I recognize we don't always feel that. Then the second distortion, I often hear singles who are separated or divorced, single again, I should say, that they believe something's wrong with them because they struggle with the ache of loneliness. Years ago, and I often repeat this, my pastor, who was married, said, you know, many times people who are divorced, others think, you know, there's something wrong with them. But he said, I'm here to tell you there's something wrong with all of us. And if you're married, just ask your spouse. They'll be sure to tell you what's wrong with you. So the point I'm making is we all fall short of the glory of God. We all sin. There's things wrong with all of us. And there are going to be times as we're no longer have that significant others. Especially when I come home from maybe speaking or traveling and it's late at night and I don't want to call a friend, I do sometimes wish there was somebody here to talk to. Or if there's something, wonderful experience and I'm alone and I don't have anybody to say, look at that sunset, or isn't that awesome? One of my friends said, she said, I just have times, sometimes seasons when I get caught in loneliness. And I just want to talk about what's going on. I just want to share my life. Oh, well, one of my married friends, this was a number of years ago, she was working with some women who were divorced, and she prayed to God that she could experience that loneliness of divorced. Well, as it turns out, as God sometimes answers prayers pretty quickly, she was going to a business conference and she was supposed to meet another person she worked with at the conference, but they got sick and so they didn't come. And because the conference was 3 hours in time difference, every time she tried to connect with her husband, it didn't work out. And then on the flight home, the lady who sat next to her tended to spend most of the time in the bathroom because she too was sick. And she said it was at that point that she realized God had answered her prayer. She said it was a real eye opener to experience those feelings of, just that loneliness of not having someone to connect to. And so by the time she got home and saw her husband, she started to cry. But as the Apostle Paul says, we need to accept where we are. He says, don't be wishing you were someplace else or with someone else. Where you are right now is God's place for you. So live and obey and love and believe that right there where you are, that God, not your marital status, God defines your life. Okay, so let's talk about recognizing the ways you can minimize. As I said, you're not going to remove all those feelings. It's natural, we're going to have times. But how can you minimize those feelings of aloneness? Well, first of all, you might have heard little children say at one time or another, I can do it myself. But when it comes to minimizing loneliness, you cannot do it by yourself. Isolation is dangerous. Now, it's common that when we're hurt, we're wounded, to lick our wounds, curl up in a corner, and be by ourselves. But that's dangerous. And the idea of being independent and not needing people, not belonging, is not healthy either. We have been created for relationships. We need people. We need to be interdependent. In Ecclesiastes 4, we read, 2 are better than 1. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity the person who falls down and has no one to help them up. So as I said, as Christians, we have Christ, but at times we don't feel him. And we want so desperately to feel his presence, his comfort. And I remember at one point when I was in that place, I was especially struggling. And so I texted a friend and I said, please pray that I feel the Lord. So she texted a bunch of other friends to pray for me. And one of them texted me and said, Georgia, you don't need to feel God. You know him. And so at those points of learning to minimize our loneliness is recognize we're not always going to feel God. And that's at the times we got to remember we know it. So what I'd like you to do is to make a list. Here's your challenge if you choose to accept. Make a list. When those lonely times hit, who can you talk to? Who can you be honest with? Be yourself. Who accepts you and doesn't feel the need to fix you? Who will be authentic with you, pray with you? Here's another thing. Who have you learned over time, shares your values, truly cares about you, and you can trust? Or if you're the kind of personality who likes to have fun, that's one of your basic desires, then who is the person you can connect with and have fun with? But understand aloneness, even if you're an extrovert who's recharged around people. I'm an introvert, so chunks of time of being alone recharges me. But if you're an extrovert, we all need to learn the skill of being alone. So maybe if that's something you hate, just start out, a couple minutes of being alone and then increase it. Sort of like an athlete, you're going to train to be alone. You want to learn to be comfortable with being alone. And that's part of being healthy. Okay, the next thing you might want to do to minimize those feelings, and I've done this more than once, is just start writing. I journal my feelings. I recognize how I'm honestly feeling, how I'm struggling. I write about it. I pray to God about it. And getting that out on paper and being able to reflect on that many times helps me. Another thing to put on your list: what is a healthy community you can be part of? Is there a Bible study? Is there a community that you need to connect with? One of the communities, in fact, it opens up next week, we only open twice a year, it's Rebuild After Divorce. And this is a community for Christian women who are growth-minded, who want to rebuild and begin anew. So it's a healthy community, a community that focuses on encouraging one another, not judging each other, supporting each other along the way. And maybe the idea of being part of any kind of community is scary for you. So maybe one of the things to minimize loneliness is for you to step out and muster up that courage and take a risk and join a community. You might be surprised how life-giving it is. The other thing for me, and I hear this more than one divorced person, is going to church alone. That is something, when I sit there in the sanctuary, I just seem to see all the couples. So for me, one of the things I do, we're going to talk about this, is plan ahead, be proactive. I'll call or text or email one of my friends, are you going to church this Sunday? And since our church has 3 services, if they say, yes, I'm going, I'll ask which service, and then I'll meet them in the lobby. So I have someone to sit with. So what are the things, in my case, sitting alone in church, maybe it's eating in a restaurant. How can you plan ahead? Holidays, vacations, how can you be proactive? So again, maybe you want to talk to a friend, brainstorm, but get that list together when you're not feeling so desperately alone, and don't have that sense of just being disconnected. Create that list now that you can refer back to when it hits. And so then the final thing is you want to commit and invest in those life-giving relationships and activities. So what am I talking about? The life-giving relationships. Well, this is the people who accept you as you are, listen to you, don't always feel the need to fix you and tell you what you need to do, like to be with you, aren't critical and negative. Now, all relationships have those moments. Things don't go well or there's a minor conflict, but I'm talking about you want the kind of relationships that over time is a pattern of healthy. So who are those people that you have? And then, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, you need to plan, you need to be proactive and connect, because we're all busy and it won't happen. So you got to put it on your calendar. What are you going to do? Who are you going to do it with? And I'll tell you how essential this connection and building these relationships is. One study found that if you lack good friends, it's as damaging to your health as being extremely obese or smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So that feeling of not having that connection, even one good relationship, one good friend, is as damaging as smoking 15 cigarettes in a day. So here's a question. Who can you plan with? Who are the creative connections that maybe you do art together, or you attend a class or a cooking session? Who are your spiritual connections that you can commit to invest in, connect with? As I mentioned earlier, who are your fun connections, the caring or empathetic connections, the professional connections? Now, you don't have to have one person in each of those. Again, you only need one good friend, but who are the friends and the connections you can cultivate? And I have to say, when I was first divorced, I didn't have any friends outside of my marriage. All my friends were married couples. So I had to start from square one. I had to join a community and build those relationships. I still kept some of my relationships. I lost some, but you have to build those relationships, and that takes time. And so you want to create the habits. The other things that are life-giving you want to invest in is things like gratitude. We all know that's important, but are you practicing gratitude on a regular basis? I try to write in my journal every day. Don't do it every day, but I write 3 things I'm thankful for, because that helps me focus on what I do have rather than what I don't have. For me, a life-giving activity is gardening. Many times it's getting outdoors for people, or doing art, or cooking, or cleaning. It doesn't matter, but what's the life-giving activities? And again, plan for them, make space for them in your life. So I'm going to allow some time for questions, but I just want to say, loneliness in separation and divorce is and can be a real battle. Accept that. Acknowledge your feelings, but then identify, are you expecting that if you had someone special in your life, that romantic relationship, or if you're married, it would take all those feelings away? That's not true. So identify and replace those distortions. Recognize, make that list of ways you yourself can minimize loneliness, and then commit and invest in those life-giving activities. Be proactive. And if you're interested in joining a growth-minded group of Christian women who are separated or divorced, Rebuild After Divorce opens up next Thursday. We only open up registration twice a year, but these are women who want to move forward, who want to rebuild their life. But they're also women who invest in one another, pray for one another, encourage one another. It's a very healthy, life-giving group. So if you're interested in that, you can go to georgiashaffer.com/rebuild membership. Then the other thing is next Thursday, I'm doing on the 26th of October, I'm doing a free workshop. Now you have to register for it, but if you go to the link in my chat, I'm doing a free workshop on 5 keys to navigating grief. Talk about a lonely experience, and that's grief, and finding healing after divorce. So that's something you might be interested in. I also have several more Facebook Lives coming up in the next week. And one I have that you might be interested is, okay, I survived separation or divorce, but I'm angry. I'm really angry. So that's something you might be interested in. But I thought I had the chat open, but I realized I can't see the chat. So if I can't bring it up, So I'm not sure if anybody's sending me a message, but here's the option. If you have a particular question, you can always email me at georgia@georgiashaffer.com. But I want to really thank you for joining us tonight. I want to encourage you that feelings of loneliness are normal. Just acknowledge them and then think of the things you can do to care for yourself to minimize this. So thanks for joining us.